So, welcome everyone. We're so glad that you're here tonight. Tonight's webinar is all about how your mindset, emotional patterns, and relationships can impact your body's ability to heal. And sometimes this is more than we realize. So, whether we're struggling with different chronic symptoms, stuck in a cycle of stress, or just curious about how the mind-body connection works, you're in the right place. So, I know a lot of my clients are on here, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm Gabrielle. I'm a functional health practitioner. I work to help people uncover the root causes of different chronic symptoms and create personalized protocols using nutrition, lifestyle, and functional testing. So, before I became a practitioner, I had a variety of different health issues. So, this led me to visit a bunch of different specialists to find the root cause. Many of those specialists were dead ends, but one person that helped me tremendously is Anna Gersch. She is a trauma coach that offers a multifaceted approach to healing beyond just talk therapy, which makes a big difference. So, a lot of my clients that I've worked with are pretty much doing everything right on paper. They're eating well, they're following their protocols, but I can tell that their stress is really holding them back from fully healing. So that's why I like to refer my clients to Anna, and I'm also really excited for this conversation tonight because of that. So before I hand it over to Anna, I just want to set the stage by explaining why mental health and emotional health are so important for physical healing. So, when we're stuck in chronic stress, whether from external pressures, unresolved trauma, or internal patterns like perfectionism, our bodies like to stay in what's called a sympathetic state. So, this is also known as fight or flight, which we've all probably heard. This state is incredibly helpful in short bursts, but when it becomes our default, it puts brakes on symptoms that are essential for healing. So, like things like digestion, hormone regulation, immune function, and detoxification. So, all of these things will slow down when our body's in fight or flight. Stress also raises cortisol and adrenaline, which over time causes inflammation, blood sugar imbalance, sleep disruption, and gut issues, which my clients know I talk all about all the time. These are really, really important for whole body health. So, the brain and body are in constant communication. So, our thoughts, emotions, and even beliefs send signals to the body that it's safe to heal or to stay on high alert. So, if we're feeling stuck, our stress and our mindset might be the missing piece. So, Anna is here tonight to guide us through how to start shifting our mindset and emotional patterns so our body can finally feel safe enough to heal. So, with that being said, I will hand it over to Anna.
That was wonderful. Thank you. It's very eloquent. As we go through the webinar, it's going to be really helpful for you to have a notebook out. And the reason why is when we go through the webinar, there will be reflections at the very end of each slide. All right, so let's begin. You covered quite a lot, Gabrielle, so thank you for that. What we will learn in this webinar is kind of like mini courses, right? A lot of webinars or classes are starting, like they have a huge topic and then they start from one end and then build and then kind of conclude. This is going to be a little bit different. We're going to kind of give you 5 different or 4 different mini classes on how mindset, body, and health are all interrelated, and those are interdisciplinary things that need a certain amount of time to kind of really understand. So it's not like your typical class, and it's not like a continuous flow. And because it's not a continuous flow where we're gonna go from one topic to another, I'm going to give you about like 30 seconds before we start each slide, just to kind of look at the information. I remember when I was in school and professors would have like a PowerPoint, I'd get so overwhelmed because they're talking about something and I'm trying to read whatever is on the PowerPoint, and my brain just would just always feel overwhelmed. So I like to give people about 30 seconds. Just go ahead and read it. Take your time. Maybe jot down some questions that come to mind as soon as you see the information, and then we can go from there. Okay, so just a quick overview. We're going to start with the science of mindset, mental health, and physical health. Then we're going to move into some aspects that are kind of huge topics in what keep us in a certain mindset, or how things like learned helplessness, for example, um, kind of reinforce the mindset that we already have. And then we're going to go kind of into the biggest topic, which is relationships. And the reason why relationships are such a big aspect to mental health is because it's only in relationships that we can get triggered, that we can heal, that we can repeat, family patterns in. So I think it's really important that we talk about relationships, and how that impacts physical health, mental health, and mindset. And then we're going to kind of end with chronic illness, right? Because Gabrielle is a functional medicine practitioner. So it's going to talk about chronic illness and how chronic illness kind of manifests from mindset and mental health. And then we're going to just end with like what to do, like what now. And so that ending is going to give you tools that you can take away from this seminar and apply it directly to your life and see what happens, right? It's going to be interactive. We're going to be doing a lot of breath work, visualization. I think Gabrielle did a pretty good explanation about me, but feel free to read this. I hate talking about myself, so we'll move on after this. All right, so let's get started. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds. Okay, so when we talk about mindset, it's really important to understand that how we think about the world, right? Our worldview is going to determine how we handle stressful situations. Now, the human body is built for stress, right? I mean, if you think about, I'm an anthropologist by my degrees in anthropology. So if you think about early humans, right, we were always exposed to the elements. We were always under stress, and it's not something that we're not built to handle. How we see that stress, right? Like if I'm a hunter on the savannah and I'm hunting a lion, right? I'm well equipped to hunt. So I don't see that. I see it as an immediate stressor, but it's not going to cause me long-term stress. Now, if you put me as a modern human in the middle of the savannah, that's going to cause some long-term stress because I'm not well equipped to handle that. Now, that is all mindset. And so it is this combination of beliefs and attitudes, conditionings that we have from very little to give us these tools on how to handle stress. Now, there's two types of mindset, and these were popularized by Dr. Carol Dweck. And if you'd like, you can read some more on her work. It's pretty good. There's two types. She said that there's a fixed mindset and then there's a growth mindset, right? You can think about a fixed mindset like a big oak tree, right? So if you think about oak trees, here in the Midwest, we have a lot of oaks. They're very big trees, or sequoias. They're very big trees. They don't have a lot of give. right? Because of the environment that they grow up in. They're very steady. And when you are very steady in some environments, that works, right? In some ways you do need to be fixed on certain things. But what happens is that when oak trees are so fixed and then you have a storm, you have a big stressor, right? They're more likely to topple down because they're very stiff, right? When we have a growth mindset, you can think about it as a palm tree or a coconut tree, right? They're very sway and they're not so fixed in nature. And the reason why is because when they handle stress, they can go with the wind, right? They're malleable. And so when we have this kind of way and approach to life, an approach to stressors, life doesn't become so personal. It doesn't happen to be an attack on you. When we have a fixed mindset, we see our values and beliefs as more of our identity. And then it becomes very difficult to handle a situation when you attach it to your identity. When we have a growth mindset, we're more flexible in our thinking. And when we talk about mental health, we'll talk a little bit more about what it actually means to be mentally healthy. But as far as mindset goes, these are the two types of mindsets. When we are fixed in our beliefs, intelligence, self-worth, all of those things, we identify with certain morals, with certain accomplishments, and then it becomes very difficult to go into a relationship and differentiate yourself from those, right? So if I have a fixed mindset and somebody comes and says like, oh man, you're a terrible mother, right? If I have my identity stuck on this idea that I'm a great mother and I'm all of these things, that to me is going to seem like an attack, right? Because it's attacking my fixed mindset. But if I have a growth mindset and somebody comes up to me and says like, oh, wow, you're a terrible mother, right? I'm going to be really curious about that. Like, what makes you think that I'm a terrible mother? Like, can you give me some examples, right? My identity isn't stuck in that belief. So I'm able to have a little bit more space, and my nervous system is actually able to have a little bit more space to get curious about what the other person is saying because I'm a palm tree. I'm flexible in not my identity, my core identity, but in these beliefs, and that they can change, right? So we're going to move on to the reflection. And go ahead and take out your journal and see what are some of the first things that came to mind when we were talking about fixed versus growth mindset. Take maybe about 30 seconds, maybe a minute to jot some of those things down. And as you guys are jotting that down, I think it's important to note that whenever we're journaling, to just kind of let things flow, right? We're not questioning anything that comes out on paper. It's just whatever comes out on paper, you know? About 30 more seconds here. All right, so we'll move on to the second part of this, which is what is mental health, right? Ever since I saw this one reel today that said like therapy was invented in 2020. And I think that that's kind of funny because I really don't think that therapy was kind of at the forefront of people's minds before then. And I think personally, this is a personal opinion. I think one of the reasons why it wasn't is because nobody ever, not in the history that I know, ever had a shutdown like that where you didn't have a choice but to sit with your feelings. And so it kind of brought a lot of things to the surface for people, and they didn't know where to go with it. And nobody really thought about mental health in the way that we think about mental health past 2020. Right now, it's you can easily find mental health professionals online. That was not the case before 2020. A lot of it was in person. We didn't have Reels and TikTok. We didn't have information that we have now about mental health. So, with that being said, though, there is a lot of things on the internet that they're not like helpful things when we think about mental health. So, what is it to be mentally healthy, right? It's to be a palm tree. To be mentally healthy means to have a way of handling stress where you are flexible. You are met with a stressor, right? I have a flat tire. I have a sick kid. I have this. I have that. Like today, Gabrielle and I were supposed to be practicing this. My mom comes in. She's like, I'm leaving. You got to take your daughter. And I was like, okay. I was met with a stressor, right? And so my nervous system ramped up because that's what it's meant to do. And, I handled that situation. We handled that situation together. And then, I'm able to come back down. My nervous system is able to come back down from that event, right? When we have a mentally healthy person, we think about flexibility. We think about a person that is adaptable and that can handle stress in an appropriate way. Now, what I mean by that is when somebody goes through a certain stage of life, let's say grief, right? You have a death of a loved one. How you handle that grief, right, shows a level of flexibility. And the reason why is because you don't dwell on it for a long period of time. And that doesn't mean that the grief isn't there, but the constant overthinking, the lack of psychological resistance when we think about that, it's not there. Now, that doesn't mean that somebody who, grieves for 2 weeks and then is fine is more healthier than somebody who grieves for 6 months and then is fine. There's no time set on this. It's what we do with that time, right? So I like to use grief because it's very relatable. Grief is something that I think every human being experiences once in their lifetime. So to be mentally healthy is to be in this very flexible state. It doesn't mean to always be happy. And that's something that I think social media has given us like a false view of, right? To be like mentally healthy people are always happy. Mentally healthy people are always calm. That's not the case, right? All the emotions are valid. You can be angry, you can be anxious, you can be all those things. How adaptable we are, right? How quickly we can come back to our baseline in our nervous system is what determines how mentally healthy you are. Are there people who go through anxious periods in their life that are mentally healthy? Absolutely. Are there people who go through depressive states in their life that are mentally healthy? Absolutely. So I want you to think about mental health in a way that doesn't put people in a box, right? It's a spectrum and it really is situational. I'm always reminded of something that one of my clients asked me the other day. She's like, how does one sister handle a certain amount of stress so differently than the other? Right. And she's an older sister and she has a younger sister. And it really just depends on your environment, how you were raised, right? Maybe the older sister had less support, and maybe the younger sister, the mom had more support. So she was able to be there, more for the younger one. So how we have these childhood interactions really sets us up for mental health later on, and how we can be so different, be live in the same, household, have the same parents, and be so different in the way that we handle stress, and yeah, decision making over time. So we're going to move on to the reflection question. So growing up, what messages did you hear in your family surrounding mental health? And in what light were therapists, psychologists, and mental health professionals seen in? I give everybody like 10, 15 more seconds. Okay. So I think Gabrielle did a really good job, kind of giving an overview about the mind body connection. And I think we have enough information to kind of know generally what the mind body connection is. So I thought it would be fun to do a visualization to actually show you what the mind body connection is. Okay. So if everybody can join me, either lower your gaze or close your eyes. Now, as you close your eyes, just kind of get in touch with what your breath is doing right now. Is your chest rising and falling? Are you breathing slowly? Are you breathing fast? Just bring some awareness to your breath. Let's just settle into our space for a moment. Take a nice inhale through your nose, nice deep breath. Exhale through your mouth, gently and slowly. And as you exhale, just sense yourself relax a little bit more with every exhale. I'd like for you to visualize a calming scene for you. Whatever that is for you, it's individual. Some people might feel calm being next to the ocean. Others might want to be hiking. Some people just want to be laying in their backyard. Whatever it is, just visualize a calming scene, something that brings peace. Just kind of let your body feel what it feels like to be in this space. Kind of give yourself some time here. Let your senses take in the environment you chose. What do you see, hear, feel, taste, smell? Let the space kind of engulf you. As you sense yourself in this space, look inward. By that I mean feel what it feels like to be in this space. What are your shoulders doing? How does your back, chest, stomach feel? Are there any impulsive feelings that come to the surface? Just gently sense them. Now I'd like for you to visualize some dark clouds coming through. Almost looks like it's going to rain. And the scene is changing a bit, getting a bit dark. Trying to look for some shelter wherever you are. You can sense that there's a rainstorm coming. You can definitely see the lightning and thunder, hear the thunder. Now you can slowly feel some raindrops coming down. At first, it's gentle, but now it's starting to come down. It's really starting to come down now, so you really have to find some shelter. Wherever you are, you can visualize a small space. It looks far in the distance. You can see a cabin, some sort of cabin, and it's got a little light. You can see that in the distance. So you're going to start to walk towards it. Maybe it's a home. Whatever it is, it's a shelter with a little light. However you visualize it is totally up to you. The rain's really coming down now. You really got to get to that shelter. You've made it. You open the door. There's a small lantern, small table, and a fire. This feels safe. It's a safe little shelter. And you can hear the rain pouring outside. Now, as you get acquainted with this little space that you're in, just sense how your body feels. Bring some awareness to how you feel internally in this space. You can hear the rain slowly start to let up. Getting almost like a light drizzle now. You can start to see the sun a bit more. And now the rains stop. You're still in the space. Take a nice deep inhale through your nose. Exhale through your mouth. Gently open your eyes whenever you're ready. And come back. Come back to our webinar. Okay. So as I took you through that journey, right? We started off with calm. We started off with peace. Maybe for some of you, that's what it was. Maybe for some of you, there was some uncertainty as to where I was going to take you, right? But overall, there was a general sense of calm. Then we started to go into a very uncertain situation. Maybe some of you started to feel anxious. Maybe you've had trauma with bad storms, right? Whatever it is, you started to get out of your comfort zone and enter a stressful situation. Then we started to look for solutions. So maybe you were more geared up, right? You were more solution focused, right? So you became a little numb. You didn't kind of go into the body. You didn't sense what was happening inside because you were looking for a place to go. And then once we go into the shelter, right, we have again a sense of calm. We come back to this sense of safety. As you did that, right, as we went through that visualization, your body was reacting to something that I made up, right? It does this all day long, right? We replay situations with our spouse, we replay memories of childhood, we think about to-do lists, we think about certain outcomes, right? We daydream. Our brain is constantly visualizing situations that our bodies are reacting to. And that kind of sums up the mind body connection, right? So when we have things that we're thinking about, things that are, kind of weighing really heavy on us, we are going to have a physical reaction because of our senses. So we'll talk, the next slide will be more about the science of that, but we've all experienced butterflies in the stomach. We've all experienced low mood. We've all experienced how happy and ecstatic we can be, right? Those are all physical sensations that we have imagined, right? We imagine a certain scenario, and then our body feels what it feels like to be in that scenario. Close your eyes and think about the first place in your body you feel the emotion of anger and joy. So if you would all like to join me in doing a somatic exercise, and somatic just refers to a body-based exercise. So if you'd like, you can just open your arms, kind of spread your fingers, just spread your arms, and just for a second, kind of notice what you feel. What do you feel when you open your arms? What is coming up for you when you open your arms? Do we feel vulnerable? Do we feel happy? Do we feel inviting? Awkward? Yeah, let's get a little weird. Let's hold it for another like 10 seconds. Let's see what happens. Do the emotions change? Do the feelings change? A close one. Maybe do one of these. Hmm. How does that feel? When we're closing our arms versus opening them, how does that feel in your body? Just a simple exercise can tell us so much about what is going on inside. All right, let's move on. You can take note of that in your journal notebook. Give you some time to run through this quickly. Okay, so let's dive into a little bit about the science, right? What happens? What is a stress response? So I'd like to mention something that a lot of people don't mention, which is temperament. So how you react to stress, whether it's fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, depends on your personality, right? Before we used to think that children are these like blank slates and they come into the world literally not knowing anything. And science has kind of come back to that with no, actually, children aren't these blank slates. They come into the world with almost like 400 different personality traits. So, they are not these little malleable. I mean, they are in a certain way because environment does change genes, but they do come with a certain temperament, right? And that temperament depends on how they're going to deal with stress, right? So I'm a fighter, and I've always been a fighter ever since I was little, right? I'm pretty much extroverted. How we respond to stress really depends on our temperament, right? Some people are more extroverted. The more extroverted you are, the more likely you are to fight or flee. The more introverted you are, the more likely you are to freeze, like shock, and fawn, which we'll talk a little bit about that. But let's go back into how do we know what to do, right? What is telling us, what is giving us information that we are dealing with a stressful situation, right? Because if I pick up this water bottle, right, for most of us, that's going to be neutral. But if somebody was hit with a water bottle over their head when they were little, me picking up this water bottle might be a little bit of a stress response, right? Somebody's getting a stress response to that. And the reason why is because we have our nervous system, we have a central nervous system, and then we have a peripheral nervous system. So our central nervous system is our brain and our spinal cord, and that is the central nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is all the nerves coming out of the spinal cord. Now, there is a very important nerve when we think about our stress response, which is the vagus nerve, which I'm sure maybe Gabrielle has talked about because that is the nerve that kind of aids in rest and digest processes, which means that when we're calm and our vagus nerve is calm, we can actually digest our food. But when we are not in a calm state, which means we are in a stress response state, then our vagus nerve is telling our bodies like, hey, you can't digest that food because you got bigger fish to fry. You got to run away from that lion or like watch out for that water bottle. So when we talk about the peripheral nervous system, we're really talking about how we're taking in information into our bodies. So when I had you stand in that very calming state and had you take in from all your senses, take in that information, how does the sand feel, right? Maybe for people who wanted to be on the beach, how did the sand feel? Did you taste a little bit of the salt water? Was the rain coming down cool on your skin, right? All of those things, even though you weren't physically there, you could feel it. And that's because our nervous system is responding, our peripheral nervous. So when we encounter anything in life, right, I'm using my senses. I'm using right now my visual senses to see a screen, right? My brain is taking that information, going into a small part of your brain called the amygdala, right? And the amygdala is kind of filtering information and saying, this is stressful, this is not. And the way that the amygdala learns that is by mindset, right? It learns what is stressful, what is not through these conditionings and beliefs that we get from when we're very little. So going back to the water bottle situation, because this is just an easy example, right? Let's say I was very little. I was like 1 year old. And every time I would go towards the electrical socket, my mom used to bop me on the head with a water bottle, right? Every time. And that became like a conditioning for me. So every time I would go there, I would think about the bop on my head. Now, my senses, my amygdala, transferred that information to my hippocampus, which is the part of the brain that is dedicated to memory, but it also does like a bunch of other things. But for time's sake, that it is dedicated to memory, I'm going to have that memory of like, whoa, watch out for the water bottle every time that I sense a water bottle is near me. Now, we've all heard of the 4F responses, the fight, flight, or freeze response, and the fawn response. That one is a little, people don't really understand the fawn response, but I'll get into that a little bit. So taking the water bottle example again, when I like drink water, I'm going to respond with a fight response because that is my temperament. I'm going to be like, why'd you raise it so high? Or like, why'd you drink that water so close to me? Or like, I'm going to start getting defensive. That's one of my things that I've had to work on, my anger and my defensiveness. But, I'm going to handle that stress in a very different way than somebody who is going to freeze, right? Maybe somebody who handles stress in a freeze response, when their partner goes to lift up the water bottle, they start to disassociate. They zone out, or they start fidgeting with something. It's almost like they're just not there. It happens like without anybody noticing, because the disassociation, the thing about disassociating, because we also hear a lot about disassociation in social media, is it gets addicting, right? Because what happens is when you disassociate, the body blocks off pain because it's actually getting ready to be eaten by something, because that's what we actually use that response for. When you see a gazelle running, right, from a zebra, when the zebra attacks it, you don't see the zebra moving anymore. It's frozen. And the reason why that is because the gazelle, not the zebra. And zebras and gazelles don't eat each other. This is just a random example. But it's disassociating. It's shutting down. And the reason why is so that antelope or whatever, that animal doesn't feel the pain associated with being eaten. So it's a remarkable way to protect ourselves. But what happens is over time, it becomes a way of handling stress in a very not proactive way, because we are disassociating. I can't deal with this right now, right? Stress. Okay. What happens when we are in a stressful situation is we get a boost of cortisol. Cortisol is really helpful. And it's a great response that we have. And that's because cortisol allows us to move from a stressful situation to find that shelter, right? To move our bodies physically into safety. Okay. Long-term cortisol has significant impact on your health. We're talking about weight gain, sleep issues, of course, gut health, hormonal health, and all of that. And the reason why cortisol does that is because it triggers an inflammation in the system. Inflammation short term is really good for the body. It's healing. You want inflammation in the body. You don't want long-term inflammation in the body. Okay. So there's no reflection for that. But if you do want to just write down What is your stress response? Oh, going back to this really quickly, sorry, everybody, I didn't cover fawn. Fawning is something that, that is debated. We don't, it should be a stress response, and some don't. Some people think that fawning should be more of a long term way of handling stress. It's not a short term way of handling stress, but I think that it can be both. You can, in the moment, let's say, let's use the water bottle example again. My husband picks up the water bottle, and all of a sudden, I'm just like, oh gosh, you're so great. I love you so much. And I'm doing this almost as a way to dismiss my own feelings because I'm worried about how he would react to me having emotions and having feelings and being scared, right? It is a way of pleasing the other person in order to get that survival need met. Um, Fawning is like a bigger topic because it does go in. It's deeper than people pleasing. It's not just this constant need for affirmation from other people. It's more of like, okay, I'll do whatever you want, just don't hit me, or I'll do whatever you want, just don't uh, drink your water that aggressively, type of thing. Okay, okay. So, what are some things that kind of keep us in this long-term stressful state, right? And how does it then affect our health? Well, the first thing that I think is pretty common if you're an immigrant is scarcity mindset, right? This idea that I never have enough. I think that that is kind of ingrained in immigrants because you come into a country with maybe very little of money support and all those things, and maybe you come from a background that is poor, and usually immigration happens because you're trying to better your circumstances in some kind of way. Always being in this scarcity mindset ends up fueling these very hasty decisions, right? Because you're always in this state of anxiety and stress that nothing is ever enough. Even if you win the lottery the next day and you get $1 million, you're going to stress about where to put that money, what to do with it, what happens when it runs out, all that stuff. And over time, what that leads to is very short term, like short sight. What's that called? I don't know what the proper term for that is, but we don't think long term. We don't have overarching ideas. We become oak trees in the way that we see life, right? I got to make money to buy the house. And then once I'm in the house, I can't enjoy it because how am I going to end up, what happens if I lose my job? Or, and not saying that that's not valid. Those things are valid. But when we only think about those things, right, we enter this mindset, right? We get stuck in those ideas, those beliefs, right? Long term, that leads to inflammation and it leads to autoimmune diseases. It leads to all sorts of hormonal imbalances, right? The next one is this learned helplessness. And oftentimes, which I don't like this way of viewing it, but oftentimes this is viewed as like the husband who doesn't know how to do anything, right? Like, oh, I didn't know that you wanted the dishes done in this kind of way. And, this like learned helplessness is like, I've tried doing it a certain way and I've failed, that now I'm just automatically going to assume that I'm going to fail, right? I'm not even going to try. And what ends up happening is your brain is constantly, you're feeling like we did with the storm, you're constantly feeling that failure. then it becomes a way of viewing life. It becomes this way of dealing with certain situations. And a lot of the times, learned helplessness can then kind of transfer into long-term effects like depression, right? Like, I'm never going to get better. This is just my life. This is what, these are just the cards that I've been dealt type of mindset. The next one is kind of niche, manufactured stress. We all manufacture stress in some kind of way, but the way that neurodiverse people do it is chef's kiss, right? We love to manufacture stress, and the reason why is because when you manufacture stress, you also sometimes manufacture a solution for that stress, and that gives us a little dopamine, right? When you finish a paper, a 10-page paper, the night before it's due, the amount of dopamine that you get from that versus spreading it out over a long period of time, right? And doing it in a way where you give yourself wiggle room and all of that, it's just not the same, right? What that ends up doing though is over time, it kind of restructures the way that your brain seeks pleasure. Um, and it does this in a way where it's never enough because the amount of dopamine kind of wears off. And then you're looking for that next hit. And then the next hit is not enough. So you're looking for something bigger. And then we get into addiction, right? And addiction is a very big topic, obviously, but we can really be addicted to anything. Anything can be an addiction. But some of the most common ones are something like sex, food, social media. Um, you know, uh, I put exercise and work, and one of the reasons why I put exercise and work is because some people think that, if I can work out 2, 3 times, 2, 3 hours a day, that's not an addiction. That's me being healthy, right? It's an addiction. So like I said, addiction is a really big topic. We can even go as far as saying things like drama are addiction, right? Because always looking for the tea, which guilty is kind of restructuring the way that we see relationships. So here is a reflection. Think about some major stresses you've had in your life and how your body has responded to them. Okay, so we can't really talk about mental health until we talk about relationships. And it is only in relationships that we can heal. And it's only in relationships that we can be dysregulated, right? So if you put me in a room where I'm comfortable and there's nothing in here to trigger me, right? Except for my water bottle, I'm not going to have any stimulus coming into my life that is going to make me uncomfortable. It's only in relationships that we start to get triggers, that we start to either feel like, unhealthy, mentally unhealthy, or mentally healthy. Um, it's been quite common for me to interact with clients who have had a series of very unhealthy relationships and then all of a sudden enter a healthy relationship and get sick, right? All of a sudden, they have autoimmune diseases and all these skin issues coming up for them, thyroid issues, right? All of a sudden, they feel sick and they're like, but this is the happiest relationship I've ever had. And so they're very confused as to, why they feel the way that they do when they are happy. And what happens is that when your body feels safe, right? It actually feels safe to unravel. And for those of you who have kids, you know that when your kid is putting up a fight, right? They are, at the peak of their tantrum. If you just say like, "Hey, do you need a hug?" They're going to lose their minds, right? The second that they get into your arms, they're going to melt. They're going to have a full meltdown. And the reason why is because they feel mirrored, they feel seen, they feel heard, they feel safe, right? So a lot of the times people think, is this a healthy relationship? Because all of a sudden I'm sick, right? And oftentimes it is because your body feels safe enough to unravel. Okay. Now, that's not saying that if you are in an abusive relationship that your body isn't giving you signals. It very likely is, but it's more to give you signals of like anxiety, that pit in your stomach, that literal like fear, right? A lot of the time I see bladder infections and UTIs in clients who are in a lot of like fearful situations with abusive relationships. A lot of skin issues too. So how does relationship kind of impact, right? I kind of gave you a little bit of an overview, but going back to our little cavemen in the savannah, they weren't cavemen, but you know what I'm trying to say. They needed each other in order to survive. We are social creatures. We cannot survive in isolation. It's literally stressful for us to be in isolation. We need the social mirroring, which is why I don't like when people say, like, oh, I don't care what people think of me, right? In a way, that's good, but you can't take it to the extreme where you literally don't care what people think of you because that social mirroring is really important because it gives us a standard of where we are in time and space, how we fit into a tribe, right? How we fit in our group. And when we don't fit in our group, that is stressful. That is a stressful event, right? So social mirroring and conformity is really important. Now, how does this play into mindset, right? Let's say I have a friend who smokes, right? And I am around this friend all the time, and I picked up smoking along with this person, right? So it's kind of become our pastime, and it's kind of become the way that we bond, how we relate to each other, right? It becomes kind of a focal point in our relationship. Now, let's say I decided or I have to, maybe, circumstances, I have to stop smoking, right? How is that dynamic, that relationship going to change, right? A lot of those fundamental things that kind of brought us together are now shifting and disappearing. And now I don't have the support anymore because my friend is like, why are you giving up smoking? Like, we take smoke breaks at work, after a drink, we go outside for a smoke, whatever it is, it's something that bonds you, right? Now you feel the lack of support. So when we talk about relationships, who we surround ourselves with, right? The tribe that we put around ourselves is really important to how our mind and body are going to react to something, right? So if we have, friends who are just never knowing what they're doing with their life, or they're never kind of settled in a way, that's how we're going to relate to each other in that same way. And it becomes very difficult then to kind of break out of that because it is how we find support, right? So think about the relationships in your life. Okay, that maybe is our reflection question, I think, but how these relationships uh, bounce back what we want to bounce back is something to think about and something to really look at in your healing journey. I also want you to take this on the flip side and not go on the opposite end of the spectrum where you literally drop everybody in your life. Okay. Don't do that because that is also not healthy, right? You don't want to constantly drop people the second that they trigger you. But just what I'm saying is evaluate those relationships because they are the ones that are going to be making an impact in how you change, whether it's your health, whether it's your mindset, whether it's, um, you know, your healing journey. So, how write down all your major relationships? Well, maybe not all of them, but just write down a few. I thought we would have more time. Write down a few of the relationships that you've had and just kind of reflect on have they been supportive of change or have they had like a mirror effect with your unhealthy patterns, right? Like the smoking example. I think this aspect is very niche to what Gabrielle does. And the reason why it is because I often see it with my clients as well, where you feel like you've done everything and you haven't gotten better, right? And so this kind of becomes a script and it becomes this way of being. It attaches to your identity. How this plays psychologically is important because a lot of people identify with an illness and they kind of, and sometimes you do, right? Like if you have no legs, you have to identify with that because you have no legs, right? You can't not identify it. You can't not make it a part of who you are. But in a lot of circumstances, it becomes a crutch, for lack of a better word, to healing. It becomes a way of being trapped in this identity because, again, you have maybe relationships that are in this identity, right? Like part of a Facebook group that has IBS. And so, now these people are like who I'm relating to. And, at a certain point in your healing journey, you do need that support. But it's really important when you have a flexible mindset, a growth type of mindset, that we then look at these situations and we say, okay, I've reached the point in my healing journey where I've identified with a certain thing, right? I've identified with being the person that has IBS, the person that has eczema, the person that has hormonal issues, PCOS. How do I get out of that, right? How do I unravel what has happened to me versus who I am? And that is something that, you have to work with a coach or a therapist to kind of get to the core of. But some of the most common ones are health anxiety, right? When you're always like, is this what's going to make me better? You kind of work yourself up to imagining how your life would be without this said illness, right? And then it doesn't happen. And you feel that crash all over again, right? This leads to this health anxiety of, I don't want to try anything new because it's not going to work, right? And that creates this learned helplessness type of mentality, mindset. So you see now that it comes full circle. So when you are on your healing journey, one of the biggest things that I recommend is to take a moment and look at some of the core personality traits that make up your identity, right? Who am I without IBS, eczema, all those things? Kind of get to the core of the person that you are, right? If you believe in God or the universe or a higher power or light or spirit, whatever you want to call it, what was that initial soul or initial spark? What were those 400 personality traits that you were born with? And that takes some time to kind of learn and weave through, but they are consistent patterns that you've had throughout your life, right? Maybe I've always been the helpful one. Maybe I've always been, the one that's always looking on the bright side of things, right? These are things that you can kind of trace all the way down. I can see this in my kids. My son is really helpful. My daughter's really nurturing, like from the get-go. Ever since she can walk, she would pick up a band-aid and if you were hurt or something, you know? And my son has always been like a fixer. He's always been like, let's get to the core of the problem and then move on type of thing. These are personality traits that are very apparent very soon. So if you have been doing this work for a very long time, it gets exhausting, and that leads to this very difficult circle of nervous system breakdown and overwork, to then that leading more into the health issues, right? And then kind of bringing it back to your mindset of like, I'm never going to get better, right? And it's this like huge cycle. And this is common. This is not a health. This is not just applicable to health. We can apply it to job searching, relationships. Why do I always date the loser? Why do I, never get the job type of thing? Okay. All right. So just a quick reflection pause here. Think about a moment in your healing journey. What are some things that you've started to identify with? Does this feel freeing or does it feel limiting? We'll do about 10 seconds with this. All right. Okay. This is kind of a long slide, so I just want to make sure everybody has a little bit of time. So what to do about all this, right? Like we've talked about all the things that could go wrong, but like, how do we fix it? So the first thing to kind of bring into your life is awareness, right? Almost be like curious. Think of yourself as like doing research and giving yourself a little bit of space from who you are in real time versus what you do. So you go out and get yourself a little notebook and make it something that you like to look at every day, and kind of be curious about your life. Start by saying, why do I drink my coffee every morning in this mug? What about this mug makes my day, right? Or why do my clothes uh, feel a certain way on my body, right? And kind of just take note, right? Like, today when I drank my coffee in a different mug, I just didn't feel as good. Or these are just examples, right? Or when I put on that shirt that was scratchy, I just noticed that I was getting more irritated, right? What this awareness does is it starts to bring into light how we respond to our environment, how we respond to our stresses in everyday life. A lot of people don't have that awareness because they are in overdrive. They are in that disassociated state. They are in this kind of like autopilot going through the motions. And it's not until something big happens where you get a jolt where you're like, oh my God, where have I been? Where have I kind of been spending my whole life? And you don't want it to get to that point. You want to bring that awareness before something big happens. Because when something big happens, oftentimes we don't have the coping skills to deal with something in a good way. We have to deal with it in an unhealthy way. So being curious about your life, right? And then maybe do this for a month or a week, and then kind of read back and see what stands out. I noticed that, every time that I miss a workout, I binge eat, or every time that I do bad at work, I tend to isolate, kind of look at those patterns and just jot them down, right? And those are the patterns that you want to work with a mental health professional to kind of help you through. How do I get better coping skills, right? Every time I fail at work, what makes me isolate? How do I then become a flexible palm tree to come back and not do that, right? The stress relief meditation we will do quickly because we are kind of way over. So we'll do that quickly. But journaling is really helpful. Somatic movement, so dancing, walking is helpful. You can do the arm exercise. You can actually keep that for longer, maybe 30 seconds, 1 minute, open, close, all those things. Um, this idea of somatic exercises being like this violently, shaking thing is taken out of context. So don't follow that. You don't want to do that without a professional being in your space to help you kind of regulate your nervous system after that. Moderate exercise. Walking is seriously the best exercise for you. And the reason why walking is because you're not just immersing yourself with nature, but you're also moving your eyes from side to side versus up and down like we do on social media. And when you're moving your eyes from side to side, your brain it has a calming effect on your brain. Okay, the basics: sleep, fresh air, sun. Those are free. Good water is another thing, a little bit of salt in your water is also great, little lemon. Um, do the simple things that make you happy, like if every day I am happy drinking my tea out of a certain cup, do that, right? Um, find an accountability partner. And what I mean by that is find somebody in your life that holds you accountable. Like, somebody who isn't afraid to, they don't just mirror your bullshit, right? Somebody who finds you accountable for making a mistake, not setting a boundary, not in a mean way. This has to be somebody that you really truly trust. And you trust them to be honest with you in a loving way, you know? And the other one, the last one is kind of really take this fixed and growth mindset. You could think of oak tree and palm tree and start to think about the ways that your life is static because you are static, right? And think about how your life can be flexible when you are flexible, right? Like if I'm always saying no to my kid and not giving them a little bit of flexibility, that child is going to have a need for control, right? And that is going to be a bad coping mechanism later on in life. So, what you can think about yourself is like, in what ways am I so fixed in my mindset that I am not allowing for health to come into my body? Or I'm not allowing, not to blame somebody for this, but what I'm saying is like, just think about certain beliefs and values that you have that are keeping you in a trap. Does anybody have any questions?
We did have two questions, or three
Oh,
actually.
yes.
One we already answered, two that were submitted beforehand.
Okay.
So we already answered some free tools to regulate the nervous system. So just to go over that again, really the basics. So breathing, spending time in nature, walking, exercise, nourishing your body, getting sleep, and then trying those the meditations, journaling, and then also just like allowing yourself to enjoy life, spending time with people you love and laughing and singing and having hobbies that you enjoy and not feeling guilty about taking time to have fun. And
Gotcha.
then, so our second question is, what are things associated with the mind-body trap that may contribute to short-term memory loss slash shrinking of the short-term memory brain center? Any ways to support improvement? And I'll hand this one to you, Anna.
Yeah. So this is a really big, it's literally its own discipline. It's cognitive neuroscience. So it is a really big topic, but I can quickly say that short-term memory loss is very common in people who have PTSD, people who have had severe trauma in their life. Not that it's, severe and not severe, but when we are in this constant state of stress, our memories don't have time to consolidate because you are in this very disassociated state, right? When you are in a state that's stressful, your brain doesn't have time to consolidate memory. And so memory consolidation happens during sleep. And especially if you have insomnia related to certain traumas, to certain PTSD, or anxiety, your body is not going to consolidate memory. And so this is very apparent in mom brain when you have children and you are literally running on maybe 4 hours of sleep if you're lucky per week. You can't think, and that's because your brain doesn't have the time to consolidate the memories from the day. So it literally just is running on empty. And that's over time, when we spread that out over time, it does lead to long-term ways of the way that your body consolidates memory, if I can say that in a very short way.
Yeah, thank you. And then the last question is, what are things associated with the mind-body trap that may contribute to chronic fatigue, procrastination, and brain fog? And then how to overcome those.
Well, how to overcome them is, starting with steps, right? Starting with that awareness. Procrastination is almost always an addiction to stress. And I see procrastination in a lot of people who have ADHD and autism. Mostly ADHD, not so much autism, but it is this addiction to the stress response, right? That really big dopamine hit that we get when we do something at the very last minute. So, chronic fatigue is a very big topic. Chronic fatigue syndrome is something that's diagnosed. There are so many things that interplay in chronic fatigue. So that unfortunately is something that I can't really give uh, a general thing to say, because some people's chronic fatigue goes away when they figure out what happened to them in childhood. And some people's chronic fatigue never goes away, regardless of, how much inner work they do, outer work, healing. It's something that they have with them. So that one is very personal, and that one's going to have to just be a one-on-one thing. But the procrastination, when we have a certain mindset of, limiting beliefs of this is who I am, and then we form that circle of these are the friends that I have that kind of reaffirm that idea, we get into this very circular way of living, and it becomes a way of rewarding ourselves for being right, because when you procrastinate all the time and you still get your work done, it's not we're not doing ourselves a favor there. We're just reinforcing that bad habit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, that's
I don't
really
know if that
great.
makes sense.
Thank you.
I
Yeah,
hope that you all enjoyed this, and I definitely enjoyed this. It was
yeah,
definitely a different way of, approaching mental health and mindset.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, thank you all for being with us today. I hope you're leaving with practical tools to improve your mindset. If you think of any questions, feel free to contact us. We're always happy to chat. So I hope you all have a great night.
Yeah. Take care. Bye bye.